Year 793 AD. June. Heads. From the opposite shore of the North Sea. A few who sailed. On Wind Farm Island, east of. An attack on the monastery of St. Cuthbert. Is organizing. Priests showered a barrage of valuables. Most of them are killed and the monastery. It was given to the flame, England before the Vikings. And made some attacks on Ireland. None. However, this attack was against a monastery, due to its targeting. It creates a huge shock effect in Europe. Today, historians call this bloody attack. Considered the beginning of the Viking Age. It does. The next few centuries. Throughout the Vikings, the gold of Europe. Brings it on. England from 865. Gradually invaded. 11th. At the beginning of the century, the Danish. Comes under the rule of the king. In France. Known today as Normandy. Semi-independent Norman. Domination is established. North Atlantic by 1000. Needle is one of the most remote corners of the Mediterranean, all the way to the busiest ports. There are traces of Vikings. However, in 1066 Harald Hardrada, an unsuccessful move to England, died during the invasion attempt. The Viking Age is finally over. History belongs to stories to. Turns into legends. Iceland mainly during the 13th and 14th century. Many Northern European. Legendary Viking Age. He wrote epics describing his kings. Is taken. Here are some of these epics. Ruled Sweden and Denmark, France. He mentions the king who made raids with England. Its story has been told for generations and that continues to this day. From a king. From the legendary Viking king Ragnar Lodbrok. The great epics of Ragnar Lodbrok. Some descended from Sweden and Denmark has been in peace for many years. Legendary Scandinavian king who ruled. Connects to Ivar Vid family. Ivar's daughter. Auds. King of the Slavic land, Waldar. From his marriage to Harald and Runvar. 2 children are born. Of Runvar. After his death he was replaced by his son Sigurd Ring. Gets. The death of the great king Ivar. Harald then becomes king of Denmark. Niece. Sigurd becomes king of Sweden. In epics. From the limited information given, one of Sigurd's, while in Switzerland under his uncle Harald, appears to have prevailed. However, this situation does not last long. Bravalla between the two sides. In the Battle of Harald both his army and also loses his life. Denmark and Sweden. Under a single king. Merge. Icelandic epics, in different versions, from around the year 770, Sweden alone until 804. King of Denmark along with the Swedish. Sigurd is located in the south of Norway. Small kingdom of Alfheim. He marries his princess Alfhild. Here is Ragnar Lodbrok. This marriage is born as a result. The epics about Ragnar, wars or heroism. He focuses more on his private life. Actually, even these are legendary. It is full of heroic stories. The women he married are extraordinary. As characters with attributes. Is described. His first wife, Ragnar Savage, Thor, whom he had the right to marry by killing the year. The other to bloody skirmishes with him and beyond the sea. Participating in looting expeditions. But the name is only a 12th century. At the Gestodenam, the history of Denmark. It's Lagertha. This detail. Historians' history of Lagertha. Cause skepticism to. Has been. His third wife is Scandinavian. Subject in the world's most vivid love story. Warrior with the dragon slayer Sigurd. And the virgin Aslauge. At least 8 children of Ragnar from these marriages. It is possible. Among them, Ivar, Bjorn, Ubba, Halfdan, Sigurd are the most famous. To the 13th century epic of Ragnar Lodbrok. According to each of these children, when they grow up, they are famous Vikings. Turns into a warrior. In time, their fame spreads all over the Scandinavian. Such that the exploits of Ragnar Lodbrok remains in the shadow of his fame. To this situation, resentful Ragnar, next to the last 3, taking his trusted men with him, leaves Scandinavia by ship. Purpose: invade England with few men and restore its old-day reputation. Is to win. But this time its A turns into disaster. In the north of England, Kingdom of Northumbria, its ruler, Aella, had a personal animosity. Captures Ragnar, famous and king. Witnessed their heroism over the years. has been and no weapon has. He thinks he will kill. For this reason, he threw Ragnar into a pit full of snakes. He executes it. By this time, the north of England, dozens of disasters from the sea, faced, but now what is approaching is the apocalypse. Ragnar's anger and sons filled with hatred to avenge their father. With thousands of men and hundreds of ships, he sails to England. A few in the year Aella will die and the Vikings will take over most of England, will pass. Other Icelandic epics and epics. The poems tell a similar story. Epic of Ragnar, typical medieval heroism, with the fantastic elements in their stories. It is decorated. For example, some losses Ragnar with a dragon to get Thor. He says he collided. Because of such fantastic narratives, historians, more of the story than the reality, is skeptical of its reality. Also, almost all of these, 300 from the time of Ragnar, was written about a year later. A historic Ragnar. How hard it is to reveal the figure will be better understood. Well, how can the story of the real Ragnar Lodbrok be traced at this point? Or it is necessary to ask, in all these stories, tightly tied together, myth and truth can be distinguished. How much can it be loosened? In fact, we have a starting point for doing this. But surprisingly real numbers, more than Ragnar's story to reach. Written about his sons. We need to review the records. For they are the most real thing we have of Ragnar. Research done today. Us Ragnar in medieval sources. Of some men who pass as sons. He says he really lived. For example, Bjorn's 857 to 875. Some years on the banks of the Seine River. Raids on cities. We know, Ivar and Ubber in 865. The great Viking who invaded England. Place among the leaders of the army. They were taking. Ivar 873 in Dublin, Ubber's, which took place around Devon in 878. He is thought to have died during a war. These famous leaders of the Viking Age. Activities of the 9th century. Many in the records. Comes out. In short, this is there. Very good that they are historical figures. We know, but with the legends, when we compare records, we are encountering a problem. In epics, that was terrifying in medieval Europe. Sons of Viking leaders Ragnar passes as, in contrast, 9th century Anglo-Saxon and Frankish records of who is the father of these men. He doesn't say a word about it. More like an Ivar, Bjorn, Ubber, Halfdan, Sigurd, a record confirming that historical figures were brothers. We don't have. Sources separate them. War leaders acting independently. Defines as. So how did this get established for me over the years? Now allow historical records to follow it as far as it gives. Let's work. First historical record to mention Ragnar. Circa 1070, Norman historian. Written by William of Jumiges. A manuscript. William is the father of the famous Viking king Bjorn. A man named Ragnar Lodbrok says it is. Written by William. Among the pages about Ragnar. Can't find anything more. However, the name Lodbrok was a few years from now. Then it appears again. Bremen's Adam Lodbrok, England, father of the ruthless King Ivar who invaded, writes that, by the 1120s, Icelandic writer I. Thorgilsson is the first once to get a named Ragnar Lodbrok. Uses, when we arrived in the 12th century, Ragnar, legends whose stories circulate, becomes, most of the 9th century, great warriors as his sons, being defined. From this moment on, Ragnar is more than a historical figure, turns into a legendary character. In contrast, historians say the real Ragnar, several figures that can be described as, continues to stand on it. The most widely accepted of these candidate, Regin Hyas, who besieged Paris in 845. A Danish Viking leader, to the Seine with a fleet of 120 ships. This crossing and with around 4,000 men. Some of the cities in the region, except for the plunder of Regin Hyas, we know a lot about. Cannot be said, asking records from the 9th century, that he is a cruel and wild man. Says, capture 111 men in the Frankish army, executed on an island in the Seine. Undoubtedly contributed to this image. Must have been found. Another for Ragnar, candidate written in the 12th century. St. Lothbrok in the Neots Chronicles. A man named, the Battle of Pingvin in 878. British winners. Viking camp, called Raven while plundering. They capture an ostentatious banner. St. According to the Neots Chronicles, this banner is Lothbrok. by the daughters of a man named Woven. Another candidate is the jester Da Norda, a Viking named Ragnar, but this man's 845. Same as Regin Hyas attacking Paris. Historians who claim to be a man. There is Frank records Regin Hyas's. After the king left France, it says he died in Denmark. However, jester Da Norda Ragnar's 851. A great expedition to Dublin in. Recorded to do. If these two are the same, the person is Regin Hyas Frank. As early as recorded, it seems that he did not die in history. Despite all these candidates, historians, a much more interesting idea with Ragnar. There is, accordingly, Ragnar is actually a single, not a person. Circa 9th century, some of the famous Viking leaders who lived. Inspired by a legendary man, who knows, maybe some of them. Regin Hyas, which we just mentioned. Historical like Lothbrok and Ragnar. And the men you meet on the record. There is, however, the full extent of the works attributed to Ragnar. Performed by whom? Impossible to predict. At that point the most, we need to ask the buyer question. From where epics created such a hero? Why was this needed? Rise of monarchs throughout history. And their ancestry to gain legitimacy, legendary figures and even mythological. We see that it is based on figures. For example, progeny of Spartan kings Greek hero. Hercules, descendant of Romulus, founder of Rome. Was based on Mars, the god of war. History was created later like these. It is full of family trees. And most of these pedigrees, who want to build their power firmly, knowingly by the members of the dynasty, was created. Today, historians have some from 900 BC. The power of the Viking kings. A similar way to reinforce, they think they are applying. England from 888 to 190. Invading Guthrum and the 11th century. In the UK, Norway and Denmark. Canute reigning as its king. It is among the kings of the two, descended from Ragnar, especially, invading or obtaining England. Every king Ragnar who wishes to keep his descendants and his sons, the rightful owner of the conquered lands, claims to be. The video, before ending Ragnar and, from the point of view of his sons Viking kings, it is useful to put a final emphasis on its function. There is, so reverse the whole story. Need to read. Now. Historically the end of the Viking Age. Let's get to the times. In these years, many of the kings who invaded England, from the 10th century it's to legitimize their rule, for whose descendants formerly reigned. The need to base it on Viking kings. They heard. Among these kings, suitable ones conquered England in 865. Invading Viking leaders, however, at one point in history, instead of taking advantage of them all in a common, a legendary one, the idea to create a Viking lineage arose. After that, some business close to the kings. In the imaginary notes of historians and in epics, left to the legends, the famous Viking who invaded England, leaders of one man at last, gathered under, all big, kings united in his line. This man, his name was Ragnar Lodbrok. The next videos will be on Viking legends. Thank you for listening to me.